Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Well, we started off 2012 with a wonderful prediction about what we can expect in the coming year. Of course, many of us all around the world have been anticipating the end of the Mayan calendar, and what is that going to bring for us in the world today? On the program, we brought people who were astrologists who came and they gave us our view of what we can anticipate or expect for the future. And a lot of people, for the most part, like to feel encouraged about what they hear from people like this, but maybe there's also an underlying current of what you could call maybe some disbelief or cynicism. Well, on the Beyond 50 radio program, we like to approach things more holistically, so we're bringing on another person who's going to be doing some forecasting for us, but have a more, we'll just maybe call it a logical approach. On the program, our guest today has been forecasting business for more than 30 years, studying trends with an impressive track record in his private and public sector. He's joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today as the editor of the Lifestyle section of the Futurist magazine. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, strategic forecaster and Lifestyles editor of the Futurist, Mr. David Pierce Snyder. David, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Very pleased to be here.
You bet. Now, you've been on a series of mainstream shows such as Nightline, Today, CNN, MSNBC, and, of course, Beyond 50. And, so certainly when you're on shows like that, you kind of really pull ahead of the pack, especially when it comes to astrologers and crystal balls, where, what you have to really share and say, is really mainstream. Like, this is some real things, trends, things that are actually happening. Tell us how you first got started in this work.
Well, I was with the Internal Revenue Service. Actually,
that's always a good start.
Well, no, my first job coming out of college was at the Census Bureau, and that's when I started doing forecasting as part of the business census, and then I shifted over to IRS and worked with them, especially early on when they were installing their very first computers, and because that went very well, I moved over, and they made me their chief of long-range planning for about a decade. And the IRS has much better data than the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau only collects data once every 10 years. IRS gets it every year, and they got a bigger stick to bludgeon the people with in terms of actually responding accurately. Mm-hmm. So that gave us some really wonderful base data in order to be able to make some forecasts of the economy, as well as patterns of change in the makeup of society, whether the marriage rates were going up or going down, what the average age of people was, and so forth. And so when I then left the IRS back in 1981 to go into business for myself as a consulting futurist, I had a pretty well-established pattern of the kinds of data that are available that enable us to base accurate forecasts, reliable forecasts, as opposed to all the things that people make money forecasting at, like the stock market. It turns out, statistically, you cannot forecast the stock market behavior from 1 minute to the next, let alone
that's a fact.
A week or a month out. But people make a really good living forecasting.
They sure do. They get you all jazzed up or concerned, and you just kind of follow their advice. Yeah.
Right, and people that stand up there and say, I'm going to tell you how well the economy is going to do this year. And once again, the economy is an enormously complex system, and there are so many variables that can screw up the economy that you can't really make a confident forecast about the economy. But there are three areas of the larger national enterprise that we can forecast about. One is demographics. We can forecast the adult population of the country out 15 years, broken down by age, by race, by gender, so we can describe to you exactly what the labor force is going to be like in 2025 and what the retail markets are going to be like, what consumer populations are going to be. I mean, everybody who's going to be an adult 15 years from now has already been born. So this, it's a long lead time in creating adults.
And it's fairly predictable within each decade of a person's age group what their buying habits and attitudes are going to be, right?
Well, that to begin with. Right. Then, of course, we also recognize that as people age, their buying habits change.
Exactly. That's what I meant by decades. Like,
right.
you know, from 10 to 20, 20 to 30, it's fairly predictable what a person is going to do in those 10 years span.
Absolutely true.
Okay.
And when you're talking about 300 million people, that gives you an aggregate ability to talk about then what kind of products will be in greater demand versus lesser demand, which says that we can forecast the structure of the economy, which sectors of the economy will grow and which will decline. We can do those out about 10 years with considerable reliability. And then finally, technology. We can forecast the kinds of technology that will be in mass market use out about 7 to 8 years, because there's a pipeline for technology, and if you simply read the technical journals, you know what's in the pipeline, when they expect it to come out, what the technology can do, and how much it'll cost. Now, one of the things it doesn't tell us is, what are the consumers going to do with that technology? That's the wonderful thing about our free society. People go out and invent all kinds of interesting ways to use the technology the inventor never had in mind. So it's not to say that you can forecast the future with any perfection, but you certainly can say some basic important things about what we know for sure will occur in the next 10 to 15 years. The easiest examples is that we know because the boomers started to turn 65 at the beginning of last year. And so the over 65 share of the population is now going to grow dramatically. And within 5 years, the over 65-year-olds will be the largest age group in our adult population. So by the time we get to 2015, about 1 out of 4 Americans will be over 65, U.S. adults. And by 2023 or 24, 1 out of 3 adult Americans will be over 65. Well, now, what's important about that? The over 65-year-olds consume more than 2/3 of all the health care in the country. So if the over 65 population is going to explode, which we know for sure is true, then we also know that the healthcare industry, which is already the largest industry in America, 17% of our gross domestic product, 20% of all the workers in the country, that's going to explode in size. And Congressional Budget Office says that by 2020, it will be 20% of the GDP will be healthcare, and by 2025, it'll be 25%. So a quarter of the entire U.S. economy will be in healthcare. And that also says, by the way, a quarter of all the jobs will be in healthcare. So for those people that are contemplating either beginning a career or switching a career, your best option is going to be healthcare. And you see that in the daily news every day, that, well, all these other places are having layoffs, but healthcare isn't having layoffs. Healthcare is growing robustly. And then finally, you add to it the things we know about technology. And one of the things that's going to happen to healthcare over the next 10 years is that under federal law, all hospitals must have electronic medical record systems by 2014. And all individual doctors must have electronic medical record systems by 2017. And there are so many errors in our healthcare system that kill hundreds of thousands of people a year. And all of those will be eliminated by electronic medical records. So the quality of healthcare will go up over the next 10 years, and the cost of healthcare will go down because of the wonderful efficiencies that electronic medical record keeping will enable us to institute in healthcare in the first place.
Well, you know, David, just on that note, too, when you say that the healthcare is going to go down, I would say because of the efficiency and the accuracy of the healthcare, as you just said, you know, a lot of people die as a result of, you know, the wrong information or bad information, whatever it may be, is that now it would go down because the trend for lawsuits due to malpractice would go down. Is that kind of a way of looking at it as well?
That might well happen, but here's one of the interesting dimensions of that.
Okay.
we think of healthcare as a segment of our economy that's largely made up of independent practitioners. You know, up until about 2005, 3/4 of all the medical practices were owned by doctors. But as malpractice insurance rates have gone up, and largely because the amount of malpractice has gone up, a great number of individual practitioners have said, wow, I can't afford this malpractice insurance anymore, and what's more, the government's now going to make me install an electronic medical record system. I don't want to do that, but here is an health insurance company that says, we're looking to buy medical practices so that we can manage the practices and reduce the healthcare costs by prescribing best practice by the doctors. And then the hospitals around us are, not only are they consolidating into a handful of huge nationwide hospital companies, they're buying individual healthcare practices as well so that they can have a network of people who work for them as salaried employees and have to follow their management principles and their medical practice guidelines, and that will also improve the quality of healthcare. So a complete transformation is about to happen to the largest industry in America, healthcare, right before our eyes. It'll all be done in 5 or 6 years, and suddenly, instead of everybody going to individual doctors that are self-employed medical practices, it's all going to be huge national corporations with salaried employee doctors working for them.
Now, first of all, I want to wonder, is this going to be a good thing? And the reason I say that is back when President-elect Obama was running for office, he seemed to be attacked on his health care issue based on the fact that this is a socialist approach where everybody gets health care. In fact, I thought primarily, I wasn't really listening to him, but I thought, every W-2 wage earner in America should have access to health care at one level or another. And I've actually talked with a couple of medical professionals about this. Just to me, it seemed like a good idea. Like, for instance, you're in the military, you get health care and dental and vision and all that. So if they get it, why can't they apply the same rules to, let's say, the civilian population? They said, well, that's socialist to a degree that works, but then on the other hand, you sort of lose choice to really, really good care if you need to.
That's our perception.
Okay. Tell us about the reality of how this could be better.
And almost all of the other mature industrial economies have a single-payer type system.
Right.
Because
a lot of countries were attacking U.S. for even having that attitude of saying, socialists, what are you kidding? It's working well for us.
Oh, well, it absolutely is. And, of course, all those plans have an escape clause that says, look, if you've got enough money that you don't want to go to the public practitioner or those that are covered by the government insurance, that's fine. You go out and buy from people who figure that I'm going to treat the carriage trade and I'm going to be that much better than everybody else. So that's what happens in Canada. That's what happens in Great Britain and Germany and Japan. Mm-hmm. They all have that kind of escape clause for those people that have enough money that they can afford to buy first-class health care.
Sure.
The problem is that mainstream health care in our country is not nearly as good as it is in all of the other mature industrial economies, and its cost is much higher. The average American pays more than twice as much for health care as any other mature industrial economy's citizens.
Wow.
And we get much worse health care. And the reason is that there's no one managing all of these independent doctors. You walk in the door, you give them their symptoms. There's not even a standard record system, so if you don't remember all the things you've been sick with over the course of your lifetime, or
you're in the waiting room for 2.5 to 3 hours while they discover who you are.
Right. The older we get, and they say, what medications are you taking? Oh, let me think about this a minute. There's a whole windowsill over the sink of all these pills I take. And if I forget one, and then they prescribe me a new drug that has a bad interaction with the one I'm taking that I forgot, suddenly the system has made me sicker. Mm-hmm. So a combination of all of the changes, what's in the Healthcare Reform Act, which is not by any means the best kind of healthcare reform act we could have had. We could have had something like any of the European countries have, but instead, because of the political conflicts arising from that issue, we got a kind of a hybrid. But hybrid or not, it will in fact institute a number of standards and a number of technological helps that will in fact transform the quality of American healthcare up and reduce the price. And it's fairly clear that that's absolutely certain going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years.
You know, David, you bring up some really wonderful points about comparisons. And, you know, over the last 5-6 years that we've been broadcasting the show, actually approaching our 8th year next month, but that I've noticed that we tend to call ourselves here in the United States the more advanced country, okay?
Right.
But I've noticed in things such as what you're talking about, healthcare, beauty, you know, things like that, just basic everyday lifestyle choices, we seem to really be behind the 8 ball in countries or areas such as like Europe or Asia. You know, right now it's becoming mainstream more and more about what they call alternative or new age healthcare, such as acupuncture, diet, and all this. And it's like, you know, what takes us so long to do something that's been around for so long that everybody else is using and it's working well?
Well, first of all, you've got to take a look at the developing world, like the Chinese and the Indians, who have had cultures that are basically older than Western civilization. Mm-hmm. And they grew up separately, developed their own medical arts. And by the way, let me just mention in passing, one of the very first futures projects that I worked on at the Rand Corporation back in the 60s was a request from the Johnson administration to define what constitutes the quality of life. Johnson ran on the notion of the Great Society and improving the quality of life, and once he got reelected, they then said, gee, we better find out what constitutes the quality of life. So Rand, we did this research at Rand, and we started working with American citizens, but later we had outreach and interviewed Polish coal miners and Bedouin tribesmen and folks like that. And we found that in every culture of the world, good health is the number one feature of a good quality of life. That being wealthy or having status in society or having a great spouse and wonderful children, those were all important. But far and away more important, by twice as much as anything else, being healthy was it, which says that the general desire or demand for health is what the economists call price inelastic. It's so important, my health, that if I'm sick and you've got the cure, then I will pay for it. Or if I can't afford for it, then my health insurance will pay for it. Or if my health insurance can't afford it, the government will pay for it. But somebody is going to get me that cure. Mm-hmm. And that is what has made healthcare the biggest industry, not just in America, almost all mature industrial economies. Their largest employer and their largest business is healthcare. Mm-hmm. And that's particularly true the older we get, as the warranty runs out on our parts and we all have to go into the hospital. So, now, meanwhile, these older cultures that are now coming into modern times, and they're using modern pharmaceuticals and all these, electronic healthcare tools that we've got, but they also have, from their own traditions, in India, Vedic medicine, and in China, acupuncture. And it's still around, and even the herbalists, for that matter, that were the dominant providers of healthcare. And it's not to say they were wrong. They found out long before modern science did that aspirin was a great thing. They didn't call it aspirin. They called it willow bark, which happens to be rich in acetylsalicylic acid, mm-hmm. which is a wonderful analgesic and pain reducer. And they used to prescribe it for that purpose mm-hmm. Long before we invented modern medicine. So there is much overlap. We have approached this instrumentally important problem. How do I keep my health? From a different variety of sources in different cultures, now we're all coming together. And as a result, little by little, in the United States, there are more and more people that practice acupuncture. There's now even a pretty good number of doctors, most of them from India, who practice Ayurvedic medicine. And all of these things, whether it has to do with the postures you move in, the physical activities, all kinds of stuff that preceded modern science are now being brought back into medical practice as we combine everything in human knowledge to address this wonderfully important issue in human life, which is good health.
Now, along with good health also comes with what I would think to be, I guess, a downside. That means that we're living longer, which means the population growth increases. Tell us about what the future of that looks like.
Well, what we know from what they call cultural modernization, there are a bunch of factors in a society. They include things like average income, average level of education, average levels of employment, all these things. And as levels of employment go up, longevity, birth rates go down. As education goes up, birth rates go down. As economic security improves, birth rates go down. High birth rates are characteristics of cultures that have no government and therefore no social security. And I have as many children as possible because many of them will die when they're young, and I need to have at least a few of them survive to old age so they can take care of me when I get elderly. All of that was the natural safety net of basic culture. Now that we've got modern culture, we don't need to have that because we have institutions that provide us with a lot of the care that used to be provided by our relatives in our tribe. So the number one thing is that birth rates are going down everywhere. The United States was unique among all of the mature industrial economies in that our birth rates remained fairly high compared to those in Germany or any of the European countries, really, or Japan. But, by the way, since the beginning of the current economic downturn, our birth rates have fallen right off a cliff. And that's exactly what happened the last time we had a big deleveraging of our economy, which was the Great Depression, and birth rates fell by 1/3 during the 30s and early 40s. The long-term outlook in terms of people living longer, there still is a maximum end to that. Maybe we'll get to the point where we can live hundreds of years, but not in your lifetime or mine. So there is a top end to that, and at the other end, the entry-level labor pool, the young population, is shrinking. It's going to shrink by about 1% in the current decade, all right? So we don't really have to worry terribly about a massive overpopulation as a result of people living longer. The real problem is that infant mortality rates have been just knocked right down by virtue of modern medicine. And as a consequence, a lot of the kids that used to be born when we lived in tribal societies and then died don't do that anymore. They survive until adulthood. So the accelerated growth of the global population is the result of things like public health practices, clean water, good sewage systems that take away all the pollutants from our daily lives, etc. So population is, in fact, continuing to grow. We just passed the 7 billion mark. The current UN forecasts say that we will peak at around 9 billion, somewhere around 2060, 2070, and then the global population will begin to slowly decline. So that's the current outlook. In between now and then, however, we have a really serious problem, and that is that not only are there more of us, but we're becoming more prosperous. That's particularly true with the economic growth that suddenly has reached the developing nations like China, India, and Brazil. And even though their birth rates are going down because they are now modern cultures that don't need to have as many children, the fact is that they are consuming more as they become more prosperous. And there are currently a half a dozen projections out there that say, we are going to be consuming so much over the next 10, 20, 30 years that somewhere between 2030 and 2040, we're going to begin to run short of energy, food, construction materials, and water. And that's going to be a terrific challenge to all of humankind. Are we going to be able to rise to this? I noted there was a long article in USA Today yesterday saying, we're going to use up most of the available potable water in the United States here in the next 15, 20 years. Fortunately, we now have gotten so good at cleaning and purifying wastewater that we can now begin to think in terms of recycling all of our wastewater. That we'll end up drinking the water that we flushed down the toilet 3 days ago. It will go through a cleaning process, etc., and then come back to us. And that way we won't have to build more reservoirs or take more water out of the river.
It's interesting how we start getting innovative when it comes to renewable energy, and you actually talk quite about that in the magazine Futurist.
Right.
That's that very thing. Now here's a couple of things that I'd like to have you touch on. Okay, first of all, you brought up the economy. And I know that was about 2 years ago, roughly, that both Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, it could have even been 3 years, were saying, the economy is going to start improving, it's going to start getting good. Who's to argue with these two people? But for the most part, it's really not looking so good for the most part right now.
And the reason for that is that those guys are not economists.
Right.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And economists are good economists. They're also flaky economists. But good economists are basically system scientists who look at the dynamics of supply and demand and productivity, and these are the three great variables that determine how well the economy works. And what happened was that through a series of interventions that were made, political interventions by and large, in the financial marketplace starting in 2000, where we reduced our taxes below sustainable levels, but we did that because income was falling in the United States. Average wages were falling. And so we reduced the tax rates, and then the Federal Reserve said, well, and we'll help things out too. We'll keep the discount rate very low so that interest will be low and it'll be cheap to borrow money. And then the financial services industry came up with ways of bundling mortgages into equities, securitized debt obligations is the phrase they use, so that they could sell off the mortgages into the financial marketplace, and that meant the bank had more money to loan for more housing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did this, and it made borrowing money so cheap that even though American household income fell steadily over the last 10 years, they increased the amount of consumption that they undertook using borrowed money. The net result was that we got an enormous debt overhang. The government had the same problem. We had reduced the taxes and then launched 2 wars and a hugely expensive drug benefit tacked on the back of our health care insurance system. And those 3 things, without sufficient taxes, meant that the federal debt skyrocketed to boot. So we suddenly found ourselves in 2007, 2008, with an unsustainable debt, both a public debt and a personal and private debt. And now, until we are able to pay down that debt, which is what the financial experts call deleveraging, we're not going to see consumers able to revive our economy.
Mm-hmm.
Only about a third of consumers really are well enough off that they have not been hit by this. So 70% of American consumers are in serious financial straits, and what's more, we've still got all of these bad mortgages out there that haven't been settled either. And student debt, $1 trillion now, but the student debt passed $1 trillion in December. And because the economy is flat, a lot of those people borrow $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, get a college degree, go out in the marketplace, and there are no jobs for them. So that's as much a bubble as the housing bubble was.
You know, David, I want to touch on both of those, the housing bubble as well as this education bubble, because there are areas of concern here when it comes to the banks loaning money. As you said, the Federal Reserve reduced the rates, so it made it easier. Let's just say for an American household who was earning even less than $20,000 a year to buy into the American dream, okay? Great, they got a hold of the money, but the thing, now this is from my understanding, that stunk about it, is then they would take a home that was in reality worth $150,000, inflate it to $250,000, get these people to sign off on the loan, and now the houses went down back to where they really, the real value of what they were, but this person is now stuck with this $250,000 loan. Now, just recently, in fact, just a couple of days ago, I read in our local newspaper, now this is back to the same thing with education now, is that it's expected that college tuition rates are going to raise 9%, and it seems to me, it's like we know the money's available, we know we can coerce these people into going to get the money. Why not inflate the price? They're the ones stuck with the bill. That seems kind of ridiculous.
It appears that that's the
right.
mentality we're dealing with.
Right.
I'm not entirely true that is, in fact, the case. We're also dealing with the myth of the value of a college education that is drummed into young people and their parents from a very early age.
I have an argument with my wife about that sometimes. College isn't necessary, but it's good if you know what you're there for.
Well, the American dream is another one of those myths.
Exactly.
and now you're talking about something that has a marketplace demand that, like the demand for good health, is to some degree price inelastic. Mm-hmm. I don't care what it is you charge for your college degree. I know it's the only way that I'm going to be prepared to make a decent living in my adult life, so I will sink all kinds of investment into that and incur a big debt. And the same thing was true with housing. You better buy now because the housing prices were skyrocketing because of the artificial demand created by the cheap credit.
Right.
And so it's just all marketplace realities, and you can't really put your finger on a single person and say, oh, it's this guy's fault, or it's this institution that got us in this hole.
And there is something, David, that I have consistently agreed with. I always say, we're all pointing our fingers out there, but you were complicit. Nobody held a gun when you signed, on the dotted line. You bought into this through emotion. And when you can hold a bayonet, even Warren Buffett in his biography says, don't bring emotion to the market. Mr. Market will just shred you to death.
And that is absolutely true.
And when you see people buying homes, they want to buy the American dream. Why? Because they want to feel that they're of value just like their peers around them. Why do people go out and get college educations? Because they say that's where the good jobs are, and you want to buy into this because you want to be like everybody else who has the good jobs in the home.
And everybody tells you that. Your teachers tell you that. Your parents tell you that. The politicians on both sides will tell you if you don't have a decent degree, you're doomed. So, whose fault is that? It's because they all believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was a period in the past when it was true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But now the question is it going to be true in the future?
Mm-hmm.
And now, with regard to education, what you can simply say, just as technology is going to change healthcare enormously.
Sure.
So that, for instance, everybody says we don't have enough doctors now, and the projection is that the number of shortfall of doctors will rise dramatically over the next 10 years as the society ages. So, how are we going to fill that? They're finally saying now we're going to have these diagnostic tools that you can plug into your smartphone. Already available on the market today, you can buy an ultrasound wand that you plug into the end of your smartphone, and then if you pull a muscle, the way I did 2 days ago, and my left side just really is so sore, maybe I broke a rib. If I had one of these devices, I could pass it over my chest, and immediately it would show me on the screen of the smartphone, oh, look, there's a crack in the rib. You better go to the hospital. There are blood test devices that will go on the market later this year that you plug into your smartphone, and you prick your finger and put the blood on there, and it doesn't just tell you, like a diabetic meter, that your blood sugar is such and such. It tells you everything that's in your blood, and it tells you whether or not, precancerous condition, a heart disease indicator, bing. And then they'll give all these to medical technicians who are not completely doctors, who will work at storefront clinics that are open 24 hours a day that you can walk into and don't charge you an arm and a leg like an emergency room. Whenever you don't feel well or whenever you need a little guidance, that's what's going to happen. Now, think of that same paradigm as applied to education. Mm-hmm. That increasingly we will not have to go out to campuses, expensive sorts of institutions, and all that room and board. We can learn at our own pace with game-based learning exercises for every kind of skill. And you'll need formal institutions largely to certify your actual ability by taking a number of electronic tests that they will monitor. Hmm. But other than that, we will see a remarkable decline in the cost of post-secondary education brought on by what they call virtual education or online education, et cetera.
I think the advantage of that too, David, and certainly correct me if I'm going off course here with that, but that could level the playing field from, people who get good educations because the economics afford them the ability to, versus those who don't, who have to go out and get, say, student loans, where it's because of this. And I know my wife, for instance, had mentioned about, oh, goodness gracious, this was about 6 years ago, that MIT was actually in collaboration with universities around the world where you can go online and there are several types of courses that you can take for free.
You can take the entire MIT curriculum, undergraduate curriculum.
Without spending a nickel.
Without spending a nickel. Now, you've got the learning, but you don't have the piece of paper.
Understood.
And that they charge you for.
All right. But the point is, doesn't it level the playing field now? Somebody that
over the long term, it's exactly what it will do. It will level the playing field.
I think that's a wonderful thing because all of us have the ability to shine with our intelligence. We just need opportunity.
Well, and our intelligence may be something that is quirky. You have a little niche that you're very good at, but if it's not something that the schools grade you on, I think the story of Steve Jobs' life, or is it Jobs?
We know who you're talking about.
He's a dropout.
Right.
He went to a couple of schools. He took only the courses that interested him, and that included calligraphy, interestingly enough, which is why when he finally came out with the Apple computer, it had this wonderful array of type fonts that nobody else had, because he thought that the way you express yourself, as made possible by different types of type and calligraphy and so forth, was an enormously important way to maintain your individual persona in this impersonal virtual world. And then he made that very famous commencement address at Stanford, in which he pointed out, he dropped out. He never got a degree because his interests and his own particular orientation toward life didn't fit in with the standard packaged curriculum.
Right.
And this electronic education system will permit lots of people to be able to find their niche and hone their skills without going through the straitjacket of formal education.
Now, here's the beauty about what we're talking about here, David. I think it's wonderful. So you took a look at the future of healthcare. It levels the playing field for pretty much a diverse array of economic levels. Okay.
Right.
Education, it looks like that's doing the same thing because of technology. It's beautiful how technology levels the playing field so that we all have opportunity of expression.
Exactly.
The second thing the third thing now that's coming on, now we're going to go back to economics a little bit, but this is a very unique thing, and again, it was in the front page of the paper, local paper where we live here in Portland, Oregon, but it's something that I've been paying attention to in the last couple of years, and that is the ability for startup companies to get started without going to banks.
Well, yes, okay.
So let's take a look at virtual capitalization, I guess is the best way to put it.
There's all kinds of stuff from peer-to-peer lending.
Mm-hmm.
There are all kinds of websites where you can go out and you say, here's who I am, here's a little bio sketch, and here's my credentials, what I can do, and I want to start a company that does X or Y or Z, and I can't get a bank loan on this, but is anybody out there interested in helping underwrite my enterprise? Similarly, the Congress last year, in a year where they didn't pass very much legislation, they did, in fact, pass...
Too worried about their jobs in the future, I think.
Right. They did pass a modification on the Securities and Exchange Commission's charter that does let individuals now go out to the general marketplace and float loans to start small businesses with little banks and credit unions and so forth, and including issuing stock. And as long as it's less than, and I don't remember what the figure is, I think it may be $50,000, you don't have to go through all of the registration and qualifications that you would if you were going to go and do an actual initial product offering on the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, there's all kinds of ways that people can start their own businesses, and in fact, there's just, you read the articles every day of the growing number of people who are starting their own businesses. The IRS reports every year for the last 10 years, there have been over 1 million micro-businesses created every year. And micro-businesses are businesses with no employees, but a positive taxable cash flow. And these are individuals or 2 or 3 people who get together and come up with, whether it's a computer application that they sell online for $1 a toss or whatever, or designs of all kinds for ringtones or avatars. All right, there's just a huge array of opportunities for creative people to create a business doing the one thing they do very well, and then selling it on an electronic marketplace that currently serves about 2 billion people a year. There's 2 billion out of the 7 billion people in the world that are on the Internet.
Mm-hmm.
And 800 million of them are on the broadband Internet, which means you can send out colorful photographs of the thing that you make or ads and so forth that you can actually do business and have transactions online. And of course, and we really haven't gotten into this, for years the technologists have been telling us, we're going to have a cashless society and a paperless society, and it never happened. Well, it's finally going to happen. And in fact, by the time we get to 2020, we will be cashless, we will be paperless. And I tell people, if you want to experience that, you can go to Singapore now. Singapore is cashless.
Mm-hmm.
When you land in Singapore, you don't take your money down and I want to change it for Singapore dollars. No. They issue you a debit card. You buy a debit card with local money on it. Because whether you're buying something from a vending machine, you just wave it at the vending machine and it vends it. If you're going to a parking lot, if you're using a parking meter, everything is electronic. Except that it's not, it's only the visitors that use debit cards. Everybody else, it's in their cell phone. Their electronic wallet, which also has their photo ID, their medical information, etc. And what I'm suggesting is that by the time that we in the United States and the rest of the mature industrial economies reach 2020, all of us will be carrying our electronic wallets with all of this stuff that we now use paper for or metal for and coins and things like that. It'll all be gone.
Now, here's the thing, too, when you consider that, you know, the first thing I'm sure some of our listeners will be thinking, well, you know, sometimes I have to write a check to float myself for a few days until the money gets there, okay? So with something like this, you either have it or you don't. Will this be a good thing?
Well, there will be people that will, well, there's already folks like that. There's the payday lenders who charge you an arm and a leg in interest, but they will advance it on your income. Now, the mainstream financial enterprises are beginning to get into this, including there's an outfit, and it's actually in your locale in Portland, Oregon. A credit union has come up with something called Point of Wealth Terminal, and they put them in convenience stores and other places where large numbers of immigrants congregate.
Sure.
And enables you, if you get paid in cash, if you're a day laborer and you do landscape work and so forth, you put your cash in the Point of Wealth Terminal, and then you can pull out some of it in a debit card, so I can use that for some things. I can pay any of my utility bills on the Point of Wealth Terminal. I can transfer money to relatives abroad on the Point of Wealth Terminal. All of these things enabling me to have the benefits of a bank account without actually having a bank account. And so the idea is that once you establish a relationship with the credit union that sponsors these little terminals, you will also be able to get a payday loan or a short-term loan at a much lower price than if you go to a payday lender.
So it actually becomes a good thing for people in those situations, it sounds like.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, because I also know that there were lending sites for that same reason. As a matter of fact, when it came to, I'm trying to remember what it was, you know, a lot of people becoming frustrated with all the little bank, well, actually they're not little, they add up to quite a bit of money,
exactly.
Bank fees, is that there was a website where you could have a checking account. I think it was something like, I don't know, $4.95, $5. I can't remember how much it was a month. And you could actually overdraw your check, but you wouldn't get the check fee that you typically get when you do that. You just simply pay the money back. But They also had a limit to how far you could go on that, like up to $100. After that, forget about it, getting any money out of them. You know?
Right.
And which was kind of neat because usually people really go down the tubes because you overdraw your account. It's $20, $30, $50. You know, and then I've even heard, and I've probably even seen this in action years ago, is you got one big check and then 4 or 5 little checks. They let the big check run through and hold the little ones back, and then you get 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, and pretty soon you're
exactly. And in fact, the feds and the financial reform law that Congress passed 2 years ago prohibited banks from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
They said it absolutely. They had hearings. They looked into it, and they said absolutely they're not processing them at the rate at which they come in. They're processing them with the big expense first to draw down the account and then make tons of money off of your overdraft charges.
In fact, there's a lawsuit right now with Umpqua Bank from a lady where she says they're doing this to her. And it's not looking good for the bank, it looks like.
Well, it shouldn't, because I say the law has been changed to prohibit that kind of sharp practice, I think is the phrase.
I just remember there was a time I had 2 checks. For both of them to clear, I was within $3. All of a sudden, I got charged $60, and none of them were cleared, and I called them and I said, what are you guys doing? They said, well, neither of these cleared. I said, I was within $3 of both of them clearing. You couldn't let one go through and nail me on the other one? No. I said, well, you better figure out something quick because I'm going to go to your manager about this. And they took away that, and then they went ahead and let both of them clear. But I was like, this is ridiculous.
Yep. Well, and they count on the fact that a great number of people will only just look at that as more bad luck.
Yeah, exactly.
and or they get all outraged, but they won't stand up for their rights.
Right, exactly. Well, and here, now that we're into another aspect, media for years was supposed to be our watchdog, and in fact what it ended up becoming was nothing more than an embed source to hide information, but that's no longer the case anymore. You see things such as, there was the stand-up here in Portland, but that was actually something that was going on around the United States and in fact around the world, and you're seeing more and more of that, and the media can no longer hide what's going on because of the way that we can socially connect with each other. So let's talk about how media is going to change, or how it has changed, and our ability to access information and what we can do with that.
Well, obviously, huge numbers of changes. That the blogosphere is now generally regarded as part of the media. Mm-hmm. They're independent, and they can say any damn thing they want. Oh dear, I use damn. I hope that doesn't screw up.
That's totally fine, because I've noticed a lot more foul language even on mainstream shows.
I see.
And I feel encouraged by that. Apparently George Carlin is smiling now.
Just so. In any event, so first of all, the electronic media is now filled with reportage of all kinds. One dimension of that, which I think is extremely positive, is that because the cost of gathering information and taking photographs and videos and putting them up online is so low that you now have individual neighborhoods with their own electronic newsletters, and then individual sections of an entire city with their own local electronic newsletters. The big press in the city, the major publishers, now use that as a major source to feed into their regular published journals. With the source given, so that if you want to have more information about this, you go here. Or in some cases, because not all of this local news is corroborable, the Oregonian will send somebody out to interview somebody and find out, wow, is this story really right? And so they'll validate it. That's the one thing that I worry about as we lose the old established media.
Right.
They had standards.
Right, and credibility in a lot of cases, too.
Absolutely. And some papers were well known nationwide for having unusually high standards. Mm-hmm. And so that people felt very comfortable in citing those sources as being true. And you can't do that with the blogosphere. There isn't any oversight. You have to trust the guy who's sitting there at the keyboard typing out this screed. So at some point there will be, and I've got a major file on this that I keep because it's something that we don't know how it's going to work out yet. But there will be some kind of mechanism to enable the flow of information, to have some kind of certification or validation somehow. And we haven't invented that yet. I haven't seen anything so far that does that trick. Yes, there are some places, some producers of media that have a great name, like the Pew Charitable Trust, for example. I never have to worry about Pew doing good research or that their sample size was too small. They tell you exactly what the sample size was and who was sampled and what their level of confidence is in their statistics, etc. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of people, of course, who don't care about that, who don't care, in fact, about statistics because they think statistics lie. What all they're interested in is finding a blogger that shares their bias about the world.
I couldn't agree with you more on that.
and of every type, from far left to far right wing.
Right.
And they said, no, I read it on so-and-so, or Rush Limbaugh said da-da-da. And, this is what is risky. And what a lot of futurists have fretted about this for decades. They said, as we become an information society, as we get access to more and more knowledge and information, we should be able to make better decisions on our as an individual, as a family, as a corporation, as a legislature. We all ought to be able to make better decisions with access to this information. But who is going to certify that information?
Right. It reminds me of a time that I was out to dinner, and there was a group of us, and apparently at the other end of the table, what I had heard, this is what I heard, and I knew immediately what was going on, is the one guy was sharing his idea to the other gentleman, and he says, look, if you're going to talk about the history and you're going to research the history, you got to research and talk about all the history. And I knew what he was saying was, why don't you quit being so biased?
Right.
Which is what we're talking about here, because you'll tend to be drawn toward the information that agrees with you.
Absolutely. We all do it. And, so I always try to read as everything that the subject merits my learning about. Mm-hmm. And if it comes from a source that I don't normally trust, the Wall Street Journal, which is terribly biased in its editorial interjections on everything, not just on their editorial page. No, it's a lot of their analysis of things. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine, they said this. Now I've got to go out and find out what a couple of other benchmark sources are saying about this, the Financial Times, the Economist, or whatever, and almost invariably you can find, no. They've misrepresented this dimension of the problem, or they've ignored it, or they haven't, as you say, you haven't looked at all the history, you only looked at part of it. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and that's essentially true of eternal vigilance is the price of integrity in an information age where you can find information that says almost anything.
And that comes to a final point. I mean, there are so many things. We should have another show with you in the weeks to come so we can cover other areas such as, for instance, the way that we deal with energy, fuels and things like that. But since we're on this particular track here, when we're talking about information, the blogosphere, pretty much anybody can set up a way to become their own media center, let's go ahead and finish on that note. Everybody now, because you don't have that exclusivity of going through, let's say, acting school, becoming an actor, actress, or you don't go through broadcasting and journalism school, all of a sudden now you're a broadcaster, journalist, as far as the Internet's concerned. And because it's free, anybody can do this. To have a radio show on mainstream radio, you've got to find funding, which means you've got to treat it like a business, and you better be good and you better be solid, or you're going to lose your money and you're going to lose your show. On the Internet, you don't have that problem anymore. Now, so here we come to what I would like to, call the 15 minutes of fame. Everybody's a movie star. Everybody's an information specialist. Now, with things such as Facebook, just recently I was hearing how they started to get in a little bit of trouble with, or maybe even a lot of trouble, of how they're using the personal information of people to sell to advertising or whatever the case is. But that looks like it's going to change, and it's interesting how that's going to change, because I can see how that buys into the egotistical persona of people that want their 15 minutes of fame. Tell us about that.
It's something that troubles a lot of observers, futurists in particular, that this ease of access to, if you will, gratification of our ego is making us a more narcissistic society.
Oh, God, you have no idea.
And therefore, less of a collaborative social enterprise altogether.
Right.
And the other side of this is those who say, but we've got Malcolm Gladbridge and his crowdsourcing, saying, eventually everybody will be able to offer opinions, and there are people talking about going to direct democracy, so that we don't need legislators anymore. We'll just have an executive branch that proposes legislation, puts it out there, and you can vote it up or down, or you can amend it, and then get a popular mandate to amend an existing law. I think this is part of, and it will be one of the last things that we do as the information revolution is complete. And by the way, based on the pace and span of the original steam age revolution, and then the electromechanical revolution, and then the internal combustion revolution, all of these had a identical time span of about 75 years from invention to complete saturation. And we are just now entering the final 10 years of the information revolution. During this time, all of the final remaining pieces of our economy that have not yet been changed will be changed over the next 10 years as we completely assimilate this technology into every aspect of work and play and life. So by 2020, this will all be over with, guys. We'll be in the middle of whatever the new thing is, the new normal. And as a
we'll be going back to wanting our privacy, I think.
Well, and we're going to figure out during the next 10 years how we're going to wrestle with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what you read is a lot of people saying that, yeah, but the young people don't seem to care about the fact that all kinds of personal information is now shared by the world. Maybe they're right. Maybe we've made a big bugaboo out of this in our earlier manifestations of culture, and now we don't have to worry about it. Maybe they're absolutely wrong, and there will be enormous abuse of this. I mean, I'm not at all clear that I want to have ads targeted at me based on a wonderful profile of who I am and what I've bought in the past. You want this thing, and suddenly I'm hit with it every time I go up and do a search for anything. Suddenly here's a big flashing ad that you really want this thing. No, I don't. It's like the programs that when you start to type something, they immediately say, "Oh, I know, you want this." No,
right.
Actually, I don't. Just cool it. Sit back there and let me type this whole thing in.
That's what I loved about the library's card catalog system. You'd go on one search and find yourself in a totally irrelevant thing you didn't even think of. Yeah.
Sit down.
I still do that even to this day. I love that.
Encyclopedias, the same way. You look up something, and right next to it is a title of something else that has nothing to do with what you're looking up, but it is something I've always wondered about.
There you go, just like doing a crossword puzzle.
So I sit there, yes, exactly, or doing a crossword puzzle. And you say, wow, what is this? Oh, isn't this interesting? And suddenly I've blown away, talking to my grandchildren in particular, who are all now in their late teens and early 20s, about how many times they sit down to do something, a scan, a search, and get sidetracked. And suddenly 3 hours has passed. They haven't done any of their homework, and the test is tomorrow morning in just 2 hours. So there's a lot of the Wild West aspect of the newly created information world, the infosphere, that we have not yet come to grips with.
Yeah.
We will, as we go further down the road, begin to see where the problems and the opportunities are. And we will begin to, and I hesitate to use the word, but I think it's the only one I can think of, regulate or regularize our life in cyberspace. There will be rules. There will be more protections. We have trouble now thinking about those because we think about them in terms of the way the old world worked, in the world of print media. And we're going to have to go a little further down the road, not very far, 2 or 3 years, until this mass, what they call the exaflood of information. Just as an aside, there is a term, and you can look it up online, and you'll quickly see what we're talking about, called big data. And they're now saying that, wow, it's much, much easier to find important breakthrough insights by analyzing combinations of databases all mashed together than it is to sit around in a doctoral operation, like a PhD granting research university, and saying, well, we have a research budget that's just this big, and so we have to very carefully pick what we're going to spend time researching on. And the big data people say, no. What we do is scan all of the data that we've got that we don't ever have time to look at, and it'll immediately begin to show us patterns and correlations and insights we never realized before, saying, wow, look, this is a wonderful opportunity, or conversely, wow, what a dreadful problem. And we never knew we even had it as a problem, but look, finding it the way we did, we now know how to intervene and how to fix it. And so one of the things that will accelerate the rates of innovation, especially in our rules and regulations of how we live with one another, will come out of analyses of big data that is going to tell us all kinds of surprising things about life in cyberspace that we never knew. And that will lead us then to begin to invent new ways of managing our life in cyberspace.
And it's just as the actor Jeff Goldblum said in Jurassic Park, no matter how much we think we can control a thing, life always finds a way.
Right, and to add to that, whoever it was, Paul Allen says, technology always wins.
David Snyder, it's been a pleasure to have you here on the program. Can you get us, our listeners, a website they can find out more about Futurists and trends as well?
Absolutely. It's my website is www. By the way, that's pronounced treble U. www.the-futurist.com. And you'll learn about me as a futurist, but you also want to go to the World Future Society website, and that's an organization that's here in Bethesda, Maryland, where I'm located, and they publish the Futurist magazine and several other journals. And this is an organization of people interested in the future, not just futurists like myself, but anybody at all who's interested in the future. The magazine is designed for a broad interest rate, and that is, you can find them at info@wfs.org.
Thank you again for joining us here on the program. David Pierce Snyder joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm Daniel Davis. We thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. We do have a free weekly e-newsletter you can sign up for where you can find out more about what we've talked about here today. Also, be sure to visit us on our blog. We'll have an archive of the show there as well. Thank you again for tuning in. This is Beyond 50, and remember, live your day past halfway.